I am the one telling this, and I will use plain words. My name is Mara, and I grew up in America. I have never been to Europe. Last spring, my mother, Lila, died, and her will named me the executor and the heir to her shares and to the old house where I learned to read on a faded couch. My father, Martin, did not like that. At the funeral, he leaned close and said the money should sit in strong hands, meaning his. I heard the edge in his voice, the same edge I heard when the roof leaked, and he told us to wait for the sun. I told myself I would honor what my mother wrote. I told myself I would be steady, simple, and brave. 2 weeks later, he asked me to ride with him after dinner. He said he wanted to talk where the air was clean. He drove us south on the freeway, past the lit windows of Los Angeles, toward the port. The radio was off. His jaw worked like he was chewing a hard truth. We reached the old shore bridge near San Pedro, the one that hums in the wind. Fog slid across the lanes, and the smell of salt and rust came through the vents. He parked and told me to step out, just for a minute. I set my hand on the cold rail and asked what this was about. He did not answer my question. He smiled instead, and his smile felt like a door closing. We spoke with the wind in our mouths. He said I was ungrateful. He said the house should be sold, the dollars put under his care, and the company's shares managed by experience. He said he had held our lives together. I thought of Mom and me catching rain with bowls while he watched a game. I thought of the night. She whispered that kindness is also a kind of strength. I told him I would not sign the papers. I said the words out loud to hear how they sounded in the air. I will not sign. I am done being small. The words were simple and true, and they seemed to shake something loose. His face changed. His eyes went flat. He moved before I could take a step back. His hands were on my shoulders and then on my coat, and then the dark was all I could see. Cold water punched my chest. Sound turned to bubbles. For a breath, I was a child again, falling off a dock in Maine, and I heard my mother laugh and say, "Kick, baby, kick." I kicked. My coat tugged me down, heavy as a hand, so I fought my way out of it, fingers numb, heart loud, mind clear in that strange way fear can be clear. Above me, the bridge was a black line against a torn cloud. The tide grabbed and rolled me and set me down near a beam crusted with life. Up there, thin and far, my father's voice cut through the wind. Finally, now all the wealth will be mine. He thought I could not swim. He was wrong. I wrapped my arms around the beam and counted to 10 again and again. Splinters bit my palms. I kept my face turned to the air and tried to make each breath even. A light blinked along the catwalk, then blinked again. "Hey," a woman's voice called. "Hey." My throat scraped raw as I shouted back. A rope swung down, slick and rough. I looped it under my arms the way Grace showed me years ago in a self-defense class we took for fun and for fear. 2 guards hauled me up, Rosa, who smelled like coffee, and Ben, who kept saying, "You're okay, you're okay." They wrapped me in a gray blanket that felt like a wall between me and the night. "Ambulance?" Rosa asked. I shook my head. Pride, yes, but also cost. I had $47 in my wallet and a debit card that still had my name next to his on it. I was not going to hand him the bill for saving me. Rosa pointed me to a gas station with a bathroom that stayed open late. I walked there with the blanket over my shoulders like a cape, laughing once, a hard sound I did not recognize. In the mirror, my lips were blue. I fed my hair through the warm breath of the hand dryer. I bought a paper cup of coffee for $2 and a pack of crackers for $1. I counted out the singles and the quarters and slid the change back into my pocket. I sat by the window and watched the empty street. A bus sighed. A man in a yellow vest swept the sidewalk. The city felt huge and quiet at the same time, like a stage after the actors go home. My hands shook, and then slowly, they did not. When my fingers could hold a phone, I called Grace, my lawyer and my friend. She picked up on the second ring. I told her enough, not the part about the push, not yet, just the bridge, the danger, and the need to move fast. She said, "Come in first thing in the morning. Bring the file. We lock every account he can touch." I thought about Daniel at the bank, who always wore a narrow tie and knew my mother by name. I thought about the deed to the house and the shares that were worth more than $3 million on a good day. I thought about how paper can hold a life together when people try to tear it apart. "I'll be there at 8, I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone who would keep a promise. Before dawn, I drove past our old house in Pasadena and parked down the block. The porch light was off. The place looked smaller than it did when I was a child, like a shirt that shrank in the wash. I did not go in. I did not want one more thing from rooms that held too many ghosts. I sat in the car and told my mother out loud that I was still here. I told her I would close every card in my father's name before lunch. I told her I would move to the water and start fresh in Santa Monica, and that I would keep the cedar box and the photo albums and the keys. When the sky went from black to gray, I put the car in gear and felt the road settle under me. America is a big country, wide enough for a woman like me to get lost if she wants to, and found if she chooses. I will be found by myself. Tomorrow will be a day of papers and phone calls and new locks. Tonight, I am alive, and that is enough for Chapter 1. I reached Grace Holloway's office at 8 sharp with my hair still damp from the night wind and my file pressed flat under my arm. Grace is steady and calm. She poured me water, set a box of tissues on the table, and said the words that let the room stop spinning. "We move on paper first." I told her I had been on the bridge, that I was safe, and that I wanted the law between me and my father. She opened my mother's will, read each clause out loud, and traced the key lines with a pen. The trust named me as beneficiary and successor trustee. The house my mother loved was protected by the trust. The shares were to be managed for my good, not for anyone else. In America, words on a page can carry weight when your body is still shaking. Grace called Daniel Dalton at the bank on speaker. Daniel knew my mother, and his voice softened when he heard her name. We gave him the trust papers and the death certificate. We listed every account we knew: the joint checking, the credit card where my father was a co-signer, the brokerage with the blue-chip stocks my mother held for years. Daniel said, "I can freeze access tied to your father pending trustee confirmation." He moved fast. By noon, the joint card with a $25,000 limit was canceled, the debit with $4,800 in checking was closed, and access to the brokerage with about $3,200,000 was locked until the court confirmed me as sole trustee. Grace watched me write these numbers on a yellow pad. "Paper tells the story," she said. "Keep every scrap." We walked to the courthouse next. The building buzzed with whispers and shoe squeaks. Grace filed an emergency petition to confirm me as the acting trustee and to issue a notice that any attempt by my father to use trust assets would be a violation. A clerk named Paula stamped our forms, and the sound of the stamp felt like a door being bolted. Grace also drafted a short letter to the utility companies, the insurance, and the property tax office, telling them to send future notices to me in Santa Monica. I paid Grace a $5,000 retainer for my own savings. I asked for a receipt and slid it into a manila folder behind the will. I labeled the tab with a thick black marker: Lila Trust, Mara. We went to Daniel's branch, so I could sign signature cards and open a new account in my name only. He wore a narrow gray tie and kept his voice low, as if money could hear. He handed me a cashier's check from the closed joint account for $4,800, payable to the estate, and then to be placed into the trust account I now controlled. We set up text alerts so I would know if anyone tried to move a cent. He printed a list of the safe deposit box contents recorded last year: my mother's cedar box, the deed binder, and a velvet pouch with her wedding band. When I turned the key and lifted the box lid, the smell of cedar and paper rose up like a small, calm forest. I put the ring into the cedar box and closed it. "This stays with me," I said. After that, Grace called the police desk and arranged a brief escort so I could make one last visit to the old house. 2 officers, a woman named Maria and a man named Joel, walked the rooms with me. The house looked smaller than my grief. The air still held a trace of my mother's perfume. I took the photo albums, the cedar box from the safe, the deed binder, and the keys to the storage unit. I left the couch with the hollow cushions, the cracked dining chair, and the dented pans. I left the empty space where family should have been. On the porch, I set my hand on the rail and felt the sun warm the paint. "Thank you," I whispered to the walls that had held me when I was little. Then I locked the door and gave a spare key to Maria to log for the record. By early afternoon, the notifications began. A fraud alert tried to ping the old joint card. A hotel authorization in a downtown zip code failed. Grace forwarded me Daniel's note. Attempted use declined per freeze. I did not gloat. I wrote the time and the place in my ledger and drew a small square next to each entry, so I could check it off when I filed the proof. Paper can hold a life together when people try to tear it apart. I drove to a mailbox store and set up a forwarding address in Santa Monica, paid $15 for the box, and tucked the receipt behind the bank records. I bought a small lock for the storage unit for $12.49 and circled the price on the slip. These were tiny acts, but each one felt like putting a brick into a wall that would stand. When the work was done, I packed my car. I folded clothes into clear bins, slid the photo albums under the passenger seat, and wrapped the cedar box in a towel. I clipped the manila folder into a hard plastic case and slid it between the seats where I could reach it with one hand. I left 2 notes. One for Grace with a list of next steps, and one for myself that read, "Breathe, drive, arrive." I texted a friend to say I was heading west. Then I rolled onto the freeway and let the lane lines pull me like stitches drawing a wound closed. The air through the window smelled like sun-baked asphalt and salt. I watched the city thin and the sky open. By the time the sky turned gold, the sign for Santa Monica rose ahead like a promise. I said the name out loud in the car, Santa Monica, America, and it sounded like a beginning I could claim. I did not know yet which street would be mine, which small house would hold my sleep and my coffee and my quiet. I only knew that my mother's wishes were safe in my hands, that the law was moving with me, and that I had closed every door my father might try to pry open. I was a woman with a stack of papers, a full tank, and a key that would soon fit a new lock. That was enough for the road and for this chapter. I reached Santa Monica in the evening and slept in my car outside a bungalow on Bay Street. In the morning, I walked the block and listened to gulls. The house was small and beige. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a lemon tree out back, and a fence that leaned as if it needed a hug. I could see myself living there. The list price was $1,090,000. I called the agent, a calm woman named Nina, and said I wanted it. We toured as light moved across the floors. I offered the asking price and wired $300,000 as the down payment. Inspection noted a weary water heater and a sticky window. Escrow was held breath. A week later, I signed the stack. Nina said, "Congratulations." I said, "Thank you. I will make this a safe place." I paid about $10,000 in closing costs, financed the rest, and the keys clinked in my palm like a bell. The first night, I dragged a mattress to the living room and opened the windows to the ocean air. I ordered a secondhand couch for $900, a small kitchen table for $220, and a rug that looked like low tide for $120. I added a lamp for $35 and a carbon monoxide detector for $28. The stuck front window came loose with $18 of sandpaper and oil. I painted the door the color of wet sand and taped the new deadbolt code inside the pantry. I set my mother's cedar box on a shelf where the light lands at 4. I slept on the mattress for 3 weeks and did not mind. The house and I were learning each other's steps. I learned the sound it made. The water heater coughed once before it settled. The back gate clicked at midnight when the wind shifted. The lemon tree dropped fruit with a soft thud. On Sundays, I walked to the farmer's market with my neighbor, Gracie, not Grace the lawyer, a different Gracie who laughs like bells. She introduced me to a painter named Caleb and a teacher named Rosa. We ate peaches and shared a bag of cookies for $5. I told them only what I wished to tell. I was not hiding. I was choosing. Money still needs watching. I opened a separate account for the mortgage and kept a cushion there so I would sleep better. I set up auto pay and made a chart on the fridge: mortgage, insurance, utilities, groceries, savings. Daniel at the bank confirmed the trust was secure and the blue-chip shares would pay steady dividends. We moved a slice into a high-yield account for an emergency fund, $20,000. I promised not to touch it. My homeowner's policy was $1,500 for the year, and I paid it in full. I kept every receipt in a labeled binder. Paper still held my life together. Only now the pages smelled like fresh paint instead of fear. Grace called to say the court had confirmed me as sole trustee. Her voice sounded like a door clicking shut where I could finally rest. I sent her a thank you card and a check. Then I walked room to room and touched each windowsill, each hinge, each knob. I made a list of small repairs and crossed off items as I finished them, tightened the bathroom handle, oiled the closet slider, fixed the humming vent. The work felt like stitching. Each task drew the edges of my life closer. Sometimes the ocean roared like the night of the bridge. I woke with my heart racing and the taste of salt. I walked to the wet sand and stood where the foam curled around my ankles. Out loud, I talked to my mother. I am all right, I told her. I am building a life with steady hands. Your house money is safe. I told her about Gracie's laugh, Rosa's scarf, and how Caleb promised to paint the leaning fence for the price of dinner, which I said would be steaks and a pie, still under $60. He grinned. I bought a small can of primer for $24 and liked the thought of a fence that stood tall. When the mail came with my name on the deed binder, I sat at the kitchen table and traced the letters. I folded the document into its sleeve and set it beside the cedar box. I brewed coffee and let the cup warm my hands. I looked around at the calm rooms and understood something solid. I had not just survived. I had chosen. Santa Monica, America, was the city of choice. I had never been to Europe and did not need to go anywhere else. My life fit inside these walls. The house by the water breathed with me, and each breath felt like a promise I could keep. Word came back to me from Olivia, an old friend who still lived near our former street in Los Angeles. She saw my father first outside the bank, where he used to wave a gold card like a flag. Now he stood by the steps with a paper cup. The big car went first, then the condo. He tried the couch at Victor's place for a week and a half, then knocked on Paige's door and begged for a spare room. Neither wanted him. He slept near the bus station with his coat over his face. Olivia said he kept asking for me. He asked at my college. He asked at the old church. He asked at the county office. No one could tell him where I had gone. I did not answer those questions for him. I did not send food or words. That may sound cold, but this is not a tale of revenge. It is a record of choices. He pushed me from a bridge, so he could hold my mother's money alone. He made one choice. I made another. In America, there are bridges and there are doors. He chose the shove. I chose the door. I walked through, closed it behind me, and turned the lock. Each month, I turned other locks, too. I paid my mortgage on time. I rounded the payment up by $50 to chip at the principal. I kept my emergency fund at $20,000 in a high-yield account and promised myself I would not touch it unless the roof failed or the earth shook. I also decided what to do with the goods that had reached me. I set a standing donation for $200 a month to a shelter on Lincoln Boulevard where Daniel's sister, her name is Maya, works the intake desk. She called to thank me and invited me to visit. I went on a Tuesday with a bag of socks and a pack of travel-size soap. Maya walked me through the quiet hall and showed me a corkboard of job postings. She said, "We can't fix every life, but we can change one day at a time." I liked that. I told her I would bring coffee pods next time and some bus passes. It felt right to fold a corner of my comfort into someone else's cold. At home, I kept building my own steady days. The house on Bay Street held me like a cupped hand. I learned the tick of the hallway clock and the shy creak of the back step. I replaced the water heater before it failed and kept the receipt in the binder. Caleb came by with paint and a grin, and together we straightened the leaning fence. I bought a box of screws for $9 and a small level for $11. Gracie brought lemonade and laughed when the primer left a white stripe on my cheek. We worked until the slats stood true. When we were done, I grilled steaks and baked a pie. We kept the total under $60, just as I had promised, and ate on the porch while the lemon tree tapped at the window like a friend who never tires of saying hello. Some nights, the ocean still roared like the night of the bridge. When that sound pressed against the walls, I went out to the shore and let the wet sand curl around my feet. I talked to my mother the way I always do, simple and true. I told her the house was in my name and the trust was safe. I told her I had finally framed her photo, the one where she is laughing with her hair in her eyes, and set it on the mantel. I told her I had never been to Europe and didn't need to go. America felt wide enough now that I could breathe inside it. I thanked her for teaching me that kindness is a kind of strength. Once, downtown, I saw my father at a distance. He was thinner, his coat hanging heavy on his shoulders. He had a cardboard sign with a plea written in a shaky hand. For a breath, I felt the old pull, the child's string that says, "Help." Then I remembered the night wind on the bridge, his shout thrown to the dark. Finally, now all the wealth will be mine. I stood still and let the moment pass. I did not speak. I turned down a side street and kept walking. That choice felt like laying down a stone on a path I could trust. Grace called to tell me the court's confirmation had cleared every question. She said, "You are the sole trustee, full stop." Her voice was steady as a level beam. I wrote the date in my ledger and drew a square to check off later when the stamped copy came by mail. Daniel sent a note about dividends and asked if I wanted to adjust my allocations. I told him to keep them plain and boring, the way I like my mornings. I reviewed my insurance renewal $1,500 for the year and paid it in full. Paper still held my life together. The binder on my shelf was thick now, and it smelled like cedar and fresh ink. On small days, I fixed small things, a loose knob, a humming vent, a sticky lock. I left a bowl of water on the porch for stray dogs. I put a chair by the front window and read in the light. I wrote my truth in a lined notebook, slow and neat, so that if anyone asked how I got here, I could hand them pages instead of a tangle. When I reached the last pages of that notebook, I bought a new one for $7 and started again at the top. "This is my story, told by me." The words looked quiet and strong on the paper, like beams and nails. Freedom did not feel like a song. It felt like good work done in daylight, like a key turning once, like a lemon baked into a pie and shared with friends, like a roof that does not leak when rain comes. It felt like saying no to the past without shouting. It felt like not rescuing a man who never once tried to rescue me. He lived with his own breath and his own hunger. That was the only gift I had for him. For myself, I kept giving the same gift each morning. I woke, I pressed my feet to my own floor, and I chose peace. This is America, and I am a woman who walked through a door and stayed.